In a small town where everyone knew everyone, there stood a red brick school. It was more than just a place of learning, it was the heart of the community. Students laughed in the hallways, teachers shared stories over lunch, and parents gathered for meetings discussing the future of their kids. But behind those bright windows, a storm was brewing, and at the center of it was a man named Mark. Mark had just moved to town. He was new, fresh with ideas, and full of hope. With a passion for education, he applied to be the new principal of the school. He came with glowing letters of recommendation and a track record of success from his previous job. He seemed perfect for the position, but not everyone felt that way. Enter Sarah, a powerful presence on the school board. She had lived in the town all her life. A respected teacher herself, she loved the school and believed she knew what it needed. When she heard that a new principal was being considered, she felt a knot in her stomach. Something didn't sit right with her about Mark. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or perhaps it was the unknown that filled the air when he entered the room. She needed to know more. During the first board meeting, as Mark stood confidently at the front, Sarah's gaze was sharp, like a hawk eyeing its prey. He presented his vision with enthusiasm, painting a picture of innovation and growth. The board members nodded, but Sarah remained silent, her mind racing. She thought, feeling a sense of unease. The room was filled with applause, but in Sarah's heart, skepticism grew. Days turned into weeks, and the board met again. Sarah spent her nights researching Mark's past. She dug deep every school he had been in, every decision he had made. He faced challenges, yes, but so did every educator. But Mark's challenges were different. There were murmurs of conflict, whispers of decisions that had ruffled feathers. Sarah felt herself spin into uncertainty. Was Mark really a good fit for their beloved school? Finally, it was time for another board meeting. Mark, brimming with optimism, presented new ideas for improving student engagement. He showed passionate visuals of hands-on learning, after-school programs, and community partnerships. Most of the board members were impressed, but Sarah hadn't changed her mind. She stood up, her voice steady yet firm. She asked, cutting through the air with her pointed question. It was a calculated move designed to rattle him. Mark paused, his confidence slipping for just a moment. "Failure is a teacher," he replied. He offered a personal story, a moment when he faced adversity and emerged stronger, but Sarah wasn't convinced. She noticed that while some board members leaned back in their chairs, engrossed by his tales, others barely seemed engaged. She sensed cracks forming in their unity. The tension escalated as the days went by. Sarah began to rally other board members to her side. She asked one evening at a small gathering. Some were hesitant but intrigued. Another member voiced concerns about making a quick decision. "We can't risk our kids' futures," he said, his brows furrowed in thought. As the board continued to deliberate, Sarah felt emboldened. She made phone calls, gathered information from other schools, and drew attention to Mark's unorthodox methods. She circulated his past decisions, highlighting those that had caused uproar. Slowly, doubts spread like wildfire among the board members. The once enthusiastic meetings turned into serious discussions filled with apprehension. Mark sensed the shift but couldn't pinpoint why. One fateful evening, the board met again. This time, the room crackled with tension. Sarah opened the floor for discussion. She laid everything out, her voice clear and unwavering. "He may seem charismatic, but charisma isn't enough when it comes to our children's education. We need a leader grounded in this community," she said, each word dripping with her resolve. Mark sat silently, feeling like a shadow in the room. He had never faced such resistance before. He decided then to fight back. He raised his hand, requesting to speak. "I understand your concerns, Sarah. I may be new, but I want to understand this community, its values, and its needs. I want this to be a partnership," he said, his voice strong but laced with a hint of vulnerability. But Sarah wasn't disarmed. She pressed, her eyes searching for signs of weakness. The board members leaned forward, caught in the web of this confrontation. It turned into a debate filled with emotion and conflict, each side defending their stance. Mark fought passionately, sharing his vision, the research he had done on improving student outcomes, and how he planned on integrating with the community. Still, Sarah pushed back harder, using every point he made as fuel for her argument. But then, as if out of nowhere, an unexpected voice emerged. A longtime board member spoke up, sharing how they had seen Mark interact with students in the community during a recent event. "He cares about the kids," they said, their voice warm. "I watched him listen and engage with them, asking about their dreams and fears." A ripple went through the room as others nodded in agreement. Mark felt a flicker of hope, but his heart raced as Sarah tightened her grip on the conversation. But passion isn't enough, she countered, the tension palpable. As the discussion continued, it became clear that emotions were running high. Mark and Sarah stood on opposite sides of a growing chasm. Hours passed, and the meeting was still going strong. The board members were quiet, pondering and weighing their options. Then came a turning point. A new board member, someone who had been quietly observing, stood up. They suggested, "Instead of judging him for what he hasn't done, let's give him a chance to show us what he can do. We're not just voting for a person." A moment of silence followed. It was as if time had paused. Mark could feel the air shifting. Sarah's expression showed uncertainty for the first time. Then one by one, the board members began to share their thoughts. More were leaning toward giving Mark a chance, despite Sarah's protests. The debate continued late into the night, but the pendulum was swinging. Mark's vision had captured hearts, and though Sarah fought bravely, the tide was turning. Finally, it was time for the vote. Mark watched as they raised their hands, each one a testament to the struggle. The room buzzed with anticipation. Slowly, hands rose, some hesitantly, others boldly. Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. The count continued, and for every hand that went up for Mark, it felt like a dagger piercing her resolve. She had fought valiantly but knew when she was losing ground. The board chair looked around and then said, "The motion carries." A gasp filled the room as shock and relief collided. Sarah stared in disbelief, her heart racing. Mark's eyes widened in surprise, disbelief flooding over him like a wave. He held his breath as the realization sank in. He had just been voted in as the new principal despite the fierce opposition. In that moment, the tension unraveled. Applause broke out, filling the room with a hopeful energy, but Sarah stood still, her heart heavy. She had fought for what she believed in, but she also knew deep down that this struggle wasn't just about Mark. It was about their community, their children, and the future they all wished to build together. As Mark stood to acknowledge the board, looking proud yet humbled, he caught Sarah's eye. He offered a small smile, one that held promise, understanding, and maybe even a challenge. "Let's work together," he seemed to say without words, and for the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of something new, a chance for collaboration, even if it was hard to accept. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, filled with challenges, triumphs, and the potential for growth. And even as Sarah grappled with her mixed feelings, the reality of the situation pressed forward. Together, they would have to navigate the path ahead, shaping not just the school, but the very fabric of their community. The room went silent as the board's chairwoman announced the results of the vote. Every pair of eyes fixated on the tall, confident figure standing at the front, a mixture of hope and trepidation hanging in the air. Mark couldn't breathe. What would happen next would change the course of their small school and perhaps his entire life. Just days before, Mark had walked into that conference room, feeling equal parts excited and terrified. He was a new candidate for principal at Crestwood School, a quaint institution filled with bright-eyed students and dedicated teachers. He stood before the board, a group that held considerable power over his future, ready to share his vision. But mixed in with the optimism was a storm brewing behind closed doors. Sarah, a veteran board member, leaned back in her chair, skepticism etched across her face. With years of service under her belt and a passion for education that ran deep, she had her doubts. She watched his every move, studied his confident demeanor. Nothing about him felt wrong, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As Mark presented his ideas for improving teacher-student engagement and enhancing curriculum, Sarah's posture straightened, her arms crossed tightly. She listened intently, but in her mind a million questions danced. Who is this man? With every word he spoke, she became more suspicious. The meeting dragged on as he painted vivid pictures of innovation. He exclaimed, his passion radiating through the room. Some board members nodded, enchanted by the ideas he shared, but Sarah couldn't help but remember the last principal, someone who had made big promises but left the school in chaos. She wouldn't allow that to happen again. When he finished, she rose from her seat, ready to wield her doubts like weapons. "Thank you for your presentation, Mark," she began, her voice steady as steel. "But can you explain your past failures?" Everyone in the room turned their attention to Mark, sensing the tension thicken. He paused, clearly taken aback. "Failure is just a stepping stone to success," he replied, a hint of nervousness threading through his otherwise confident tone. The board members listened, but Sarah wasn't deterred. She pressed, her gaze piercing. For a moment, Mark faltered, grappling with the weight of her questions. He shared an example of a curriculum initiative that had flopped at his previous job, detailing the lessons learned from the experience. As he spoke, Sarah took mental notes, her skepticism only deepening. The more he spoke, the more it felt like he was trying to sell them a story rather than the truth. "Those setbacks helped me realize that communication is essential," he concluded, his voice rising with passion. Sarah exchanged glances with another board member, Jim, who seemed intrigued despite his earlier doubts. "But what if this community presents unique challenges? Can you adapt?" She felt the fierceness of her own questions pulsate in the room. Mark, sensing the challenge, replied with conviction, "I'm adaptable. I believe change requires listening, understanding, and collaboration," he said, looking directly at Sarah. The determination in his eyes told her he wasn't going down without a fight, but Sarah had come prepared. She spent countless hours researching Mark's history, digging into his past experiences, and reaching out to colleagues from his previous positions. She even visited the districts he had worked in, asking questions that revealed the cracks others had ignored. With each conversation, her doubts only solidified. She discovered that he had pushed for experimental programs that had encountered considerable pushback. They had been exciting, yes, but they had also left certain teachers feeling alienated, confused, and unsupported. As the clock ticked on and the meetings dragged out, Sarah found herself increasingly isolated on the board. Some members were warming up to Mark, enamored by his fresh perspective. "We need innovation," they'd argue. But Sarah couldn't shake that gnawing feeling in her gut. Mark continued to field questions with growing confidence, even managing a few laughable anecdotes that won over some hearts in the room except for Sarah's. The weight of her responsibility felt immense, and she felt like a lone soldier in battle. Every time a board member expressed excitement for Mark, she pushed harder, unwilling to back down. Weeks passed, and the board held yet another meeting. Tension crackled in the air, palpable and electric. What had been a hopeful inquiry into a new principal had turned into a battleground. Mark radiated confidence, but Sarah's resolve only grew stronger. "Let's cut to the chase," she began, taking center stage. "Understanding our community is not just about having innovative ideas. It's also about stability. It's about knowing how to lead when times get tough. Mark, can you promise us that you'll listen?" Mark opened his mouth for a response, but this time Sarah kept the pressure on. "Because we've been through too much already. The past few years have been riddled with chaos, and we can't afford to gamble with your untested methods," she asserted, her voice echoing off the walls. He nodded slowly, steadying himself. His face mirrored acknowledgement, but he didn't show signs of backing down. "I want to lead through collaboration, Sarah. Each person here has valuable experiences and insights. That's what I want to nurture," he asserted, fire building behind his words. As more debates unfolded, Sarah's feelings burgeoned. Deep down, she knew she had to keep pressing on, but some part of her began to wonder if she was being too hard. Mark wasn't a villain, he was just different. Still, her protective instincts kicked in, blurring the line between caution and fear of change. Finally, it was time to vote. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Those who supported Mark, eager for a fresh start, glanced at each other, exchanging nervous smiles. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the weight of their decision. Sarah felt the grip of anxiety tighten in her chest as the board chair prepared to call for votes. A wave of hands shot up, much to Sarah's dismay. The silence that came afterward felt deafening. She felt trapped in her thoughts, questioning if she was making a mistake. Could she really deny them the hope they craved? Then came the moment when the chair turned towards Sarah. She asked, and Sarah's heart raced as she raised her hand, feeling like an island amidst a sea of change. With the votes counted, the chair hesitated for just a moment before announcing, "The motion carries." Gasps echoed in the room as disbelief spread. Some rushed to congratulate him, while others looked toward Sarah uncertain. Her heart felt heavy. A wave of mixed emotions washed over her: anger, fear, and even a sense of betrayal. She had fought tirelessly, and yet here they were, moving forward without her vision of stability. Mark stood there, stunned, then began to smile. He made eye contact with her, and she could see both gratitude and relief in his expression. He took a step forward and managed to catch her gaze. "Thank you for pushing me," he said, quietly but firmly. "I can promise I'll do my best." Those simple words felt like light breaking through her fog of doubt. As the applause grew louder, Sarah stood still, equal parts shocked and contemplative. For the first time, perhaps, she saw beyond the uncertainty and fear she had gripped so tightly. Maybe Mark had what it took. Maybe a fresh perspective was what the school really needed. Time marched on, and as weeks turned into months, Sarah observed Mark navigate the complexities of leadership with surprising success. He listened to teachers, involved parents, and collaborated with everyone around him. Bit by bit, the changes he promised began to reflect in the school, like a garden waking up after the frost melts away. Still, moments of resistance arose. Old habits die hard, and occasional doubts crept in, especially on tough days. But Sarah couldn't help but remember that initial tension and how far they had all come. She realized that both she and Mark were learning from one another. And when the school held an event showcasing the new programs, Sarah smiled as she watched him engage with the students, the very essence of what the community needed. The school thrived, and in that vibrant atmosphere, she began to envision a future filled with hope and collaboration. Mark looked over at her during the event, acknowledging her presence with a nod and a smile. In that moment, all their struggles and challenges faded away, leaving only the realization that sometimes the greatest transformations are born from the fiercest questions. Each obstacle they faced wasn't just a brick wall, but rather a bridge leading them towards something greater. The tension in the room was palpable as the board chair leaned in, heart pounding, after the final vote was cast. She glanced at Mark standing confidently at the front, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over him. Would he be the leader this school desperately needed, or had they made a mistake? Just weeks earlier, Mark had walked into that conference room with a hopeful heart. Crestwood Academy seemed like a place of opportunity, a vibrant hub of learning nestled in a tight-knit community. He presented himself as a man ready to usher in a new era of education, but not everyone felt that way. At the center of the whirlwind was Sarah, a seasoned member of the board. She'd been part of the fabric of this school for decades, fiercely protective of its legacy. As Mark laid out his bold ideas for a curriculum overhaul, Sarah listened but couldn't shake the feeling of distrust. Something about this newcomer didn't sit right with her. His resume was impressive, but could he really understand this unique community? Mark was passionate and articulate as he painted a picture of future classrooms brightened with technology and innovative programs. He envisioned partnerships with local businesses and initiatives that would foster student engagement like never before. Some members of the board were captivated, nodding enthusiastically, but Sarah's eyes narrowed. She had seen charm before, often it masked deeper flaws. When Mark finished speaking, there was a polite applause. Sarah stood up and the room quieted, her voice cutting through like a sharp knife. "Thank you, Mark." Mark hesitated, and for a moment the confidence slipped from his face. "Certainly." In my previous position, I introduced a new teaching program that didn't go as planned. We faced significant pushback from parents and teachers alike, he admitted, his voice steadying. Sarah pressed on undeterred. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at Sarah, impressed with her forthrightness. Others seemed troubled, caught between Mark's charisma and her fierce scrutiny. Mark leaned forward, gathering his thoughts, the weight of her question pressing heavily. "Failure is part of growth. I've learned that collaboration is crucial." Sarah folded her arms, her instincts screaming. But can we trust a vision that might crumble under pressure? As the days turned into weeks, the board met multiple times. Mark presented his ideas, each time trying to win them over while Sarah questioned everything he said. Her skepticism intensified, fueled by the need to protect their community from potentially misguided leadership. The echoes of broken promises from past principals lingered heavily in her mind. Meanwhile, Mark stood in front of a classroom, watching students engage with their lessons as he strove to inspire and implement his vision. He was passionate, but Sarah's challenges gnawed at him, pulling at the edges of his confidence. Every day spent battling suspicion made him question if he could actually fit into the legacy he wanted to uphold. Then the rumors began to swirl. Teachers whispered in hallways about Mark's leadership style. "He's not showing enough respect for tradition," some claimed. Echoed others. Sarah caught wind of it all, and with each new comment, her resolve hardened. She decided to dig deeper. She spent late nights poring over Mark's history, reaching out to contacts at his previous schools to hear their perspectives. She heard stories of initiatives that had fallen flat, programs that had alienated faculty and parents alike. With every conversation, her certainty solidified. He wasn't the answer, he was a risk. One evening, at a casual gathering of fellow board members, Sarah found herself surrounded by supportive allies. Everyone wanted what was best for the school. She pitched ideas, laying out her concerns about Mark's trendy but untested methods. "We need stability and vision rooted in our community's values," she argued, her passion ignited. As discussions unfolded, the board's tension mounted, swirling like a storm about to break. There was a precarious balancing act between innovation and tradition, and Sarah stood squarely in defense of the latter. Weeks of discussions culminated in another meeting. Mark arrived with renewed enthusiasm, ready to showcase the data he had collected, reflecting improvements he hoped to implement in the student body. But Sarah stood between him and success. She began, her voice strong. "You speak of collaboration, but how do we know your plans will resonate with our unique culture?" The room felt electric with tension as Mark took a measured breath. This was his moment. "I've taken steps to understand this community. I've spoken to parents and teachers, and I value their input." His words hung in the air, and Sarah felt the same unease gnawing at her heart. But asterisk words alone could not promise results. While some board members began to show hesitance, Sarah plowed forward, unrelenting. "But how can you prove that trust in change won't lead to chaos?" Mark's brow furrowed, but he held his ground. "No one wants what's best for the students more than me. I believe it's about engaging with the parents and teachers, gaining their trust." Yet the more he reassured them, the more Sarah pounced, clearly unconvinced. "You can't just tell us you value collaboration, you must show it." Frustration flashed across Mark's face, but he kept his composure. "If engaging with the community is a precondition to my being here, then let's set specifics." In an instant, the board shifted. Mark's suggestion seemed genuine, his willingness to compromise admirable. Few members began whispering to each other, intrigued by the possibilities. But Sarah squinted, searching for hidden motives. "Creating a committee sounds good, but it can also be a smokescreen," she challenged. As the weeks dragged on, the tension between Mark and Sarah intensified. The board was split, some drawn to Mark's vision, while others stood resolute behind Sarah's caution. And as they prepared for yet another board meeting, the stakes couldn't be higher. The day of reckoning arrived, packed with emotion and anticipation. The room buzzed with anxious energy, and emotions flared as the board members took their seats. Mark was there undeterred, while Sarah sat rigid, ready to defend her position with all her might. The meeting began with smaller discussions, but it was clear that everyone held their breath for the main event, the vote. Mark had worked tirelessly to make a case for why he should be their next principal, but Sarah wasn't ready to let down her guard. "Let's just lay it on the table," she finally declared, her voice sharp. "Are we convinced he can lead us?" Mark looked at her, his eyes fierce with determination. "I understand your fears, Sarah. I assure you my intentions are rooted in love for education and for these students." As tension reached its peak, the chair rounded up the conversation time to vote. The chair began, a sense of whetted anticipation lingering. Hands gradually rose in favor, and then in opposition. Sarah remained steadfast. The chaos of conflicting emotions roared in her chest. Mark caught her eye for a brief moment. She could see the hope glimmering within him. "Thank you for your openness, board members," the chair said, scanning the room as he tallied each vote. "The motion carries." Gasps filled the room, mingled with murmurings of shock and excitement. Sarah's heart sank momentarily, the weight of responsibility clawing at her throat. She had fought fiercely, yet here they were, moving forward without the promise she had hoped for. Mark stood there, disbelief washing over him like a wave. Hope danced in his features as people around him erupted in applause. He caught Sarah's gaze again. This time it held complexity, a hint of uncertainty, but also a gleam of gratitude. "I promise to earn your trust, Sarah," he said softly, his voice reflecting something deeper. In that moment, Sarah absorbed her whirlwind of emotions, feeling both defeated and intrigued. The battle was not just about Mark, but also about her own journey. Could she learn to embrace a new path despite the fear of change? The weeks turned into months, and under Mark's leadership, transformation began to unfold. He listened to parents, teachers, and students carefully, adapting his methods to resonate with the community. New initiatives thrived while old traditions endured. Sarah watched from the sidelines, slowly recognizing the energy shifting, the palpable excitement returning to the school halls. Mark was proving himself as a leader who understood their needs, balancing innovation with stability. With every successful initiative, Sarah's skepticism began to soften. She saw the way he engaged the community, involving voices she hadn't even thought to consider. Mark wasn't the enemy, he was simply a different kind of ally. The final test, however, came one evening during a town hall meeting centered on the school's future. Mark took center stage to present plans for expanding programs that had generated incredible feedback. As his words resonated, Sarah felt an unexpected swell of pride. When he finished speaking and opened the floor for questions, she watched as former doubters turned into avid supporters. The room buzzed with excitement, and Sarah felt a warmth bubble from deep within. Maybe those early moments of distrust had coaxed something valuable out of both her and Mark. Later that night, as the crowd began to disperse, Sarah approached him. "You've done well, Mark. I didn't believe it at first, but your willingness to learn has made a difference," she admitted, genuine appreciation punctuating her words. Mark smiled, gratitude evident. "Thank you, Sarah. It was your questions that kept me grounded. They challenged me to push past my comfort zone." In that exchange, they both felt the chasm begin to close. What started as an adversarial stance had transformed into mutual respect, a partnership aimed at creating a brighter future for the school they both cared so deeply about. And just like that, the journey had changed. They both learned that challenging each other wasn't about winning, it was about crafting something far more significant. Together, they'd forged a bond through dialogue, skepticism, and ultimately, acceptance, a powerful lesson for a community eager to unite and thrive. The room buzzed with anticipation as the board members shifted in their seats, the air thick with unspoken tension. At the front stood Mark, a fresh candidate for principal, his palms slightly sweaty but his heart racing with possibility. He smiled confidently, ready to unveil his vision for Crestwood Academy, but little did he know that just a few feet away was a formidable force, a woman named Sarah, determined to protect the heart of their school. "Thank you for being here today," Mark began, his voice strong yet warm. "I believe we can create an environment where every student not only learns but thrives." As he spoke, his words painted vibrant images of the future, and some board members nodded, eyes wide with excitement, but Sarah wasn't so easily won over. A veteran of the board, she had fought through the bureaucracy and tears over many years. She had seen promising candidates come and go, each with grand visions that often crumbled under pressure. And what about this newcomer? What was his real story? Was he truly qualified to lead their beloved school? As Mark continued detailing innovative ideas that could reshape their educational landscape, Sarah's mind raced. She thought, narrowing her gaze. She'd heard it all before, the talk of revolution, the empty promises. Her heart ached for the students and teachers who had endured too much upheaval over the years. When Mark finished presenting, a wave of applause swept through the room, but Sarah stood, determined to shatter the atmosphere of blind enthusiasm. "Thank you for your vision, Mark." Her voice cut through the applause like a knife, and all eyes turned toward them. Mark hesitated, going back to that moment when he had to face failure. "Of course," he replied slowly, "at my last position, I launched a new program that didn't resonate with the community as I had hoped." Sarah leaned in, fearlessness flashing in her eyes. "And how did you learn from that? We need to know you can handle pressure and mistakes." Mark could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He needed to convey growth, resilience, and an understanding of community needs. I realized quickly that listening is crucial. The room was tense, but Mark's sincerity shone through. Still, Sarah remained skeptical, refusing to let her guard down. "But how can you ensure this community will trust you? A message alone won't win hearts." The days turned into weeks, and Mark found himself in front of the board again, each meeting filled with the weight of Sarah's doubts. He carefully crafted his responses, trying to appeal to the hearts of his audience while carrying the burden of constant scrutiny. Sarah continued to dig deeper, voicing her concerns with an intensity that rattled even the board members who once seemed inclined to support him. As nights wore on, Sarah conducted her investigation, reaching out to old colleagues of Mark's in other districts. What had they said about him? What had he really accomplished? She unearthed stories of previous conflicts, blurred lines, initiatives gone sideways, and teachers left feeling unheard. Each report fueled her apprehension, and she made it her mission to prevent another misguided choice. During one of the tense meetings, Mark laid out the detailed progress he hoped to achieve within the coming year. "Our students need hands-on experiences and opportunities to grow," he declared passionately. Sarah, arms crossed, couldn't hold back any longer. "But have you considered how this will truly impact our teachers? Planning new programs takes time, and we can't risk burning out our staff." She almost recoiled at the sight of some board members visibly wincing. This was her role to protect, and she wouldn't back down. Mark took a deep breath. "I see where you're coming from, and I promise to work closely with teachers to ensure they feel supported throughout any changes." He spoke with sincerity, but Sarah's doubts only deepened with each passing moment. The board meetings continued, the tension thickening like a fog that wouldn't lift. The community buzzed with anticipatory energy, and yet Sarah remained resolute. She spoke with anyone who would listen, gathering allies in her corner. "We need someone with a proven track record," she would argue, refusing to swing with the tides of blind optimism. As their discussions mounted, Sarah couldn't help but feel like a lone warrior, waging a battle for something she believed deeply in. She was fighting for stability for their school, for the children who had weathered so much change. Mark, meanwhile, wrestled with his frustration and longing for acceptance. Each question he faced echoed in his mind, was he enough? Weeks turned into a formidable cycle of mounting pressure. Another board meeting approached, and Sarah was dreading the thought of what might unfold. Those in support of Mark seemed eager to move forward. They chimed in, fueling the fire that Sarah was increasingly worried about. Finally, the day of judgment arrived. The air felt electric as board members filed into the room. Mark stood at the front, his heart racing as he prepared to present yet again, this time with a clearer focus on collaborative steps. He knew full well that Sarah would be relentless, but the drive inside him burned strong. With fervor, he continued to detail how he planned to implement feedback to make necessary adjustments as they moved forward, each word almost a plea for unity. But Sarah wouldn't let her walls down. "Advisory groups won't work if their concerns are brushed aside. We need leadership that understands." The room fell silent. Mark felt his confidence waver as the weight of Sarah's words filled him with doubt. He had to show them he was more than just talk. "I will embrace the fears of my community and be transparent in my actions. Trust between a leader and their constituents takes time, but I will not shy away from difficult conversations," he finally replied, a note of determination ringing through. Yet she was relentless. "You can't promise magic, Mark." Their standoff became the heart of the meeting, two forces battling for direction. Mark's earnest desire to instigate change met Sarah's unwavering protection of continuity. Each exchange was imbued with urgency, the board watching and waiting to see which way the winds would blow. As the meeting progressed and the clock ticked down, the board chair announced that it was nearly time to vote. "We've had plenty of discussion. It's time for us to decide." The room went still, a hush enveloping them. The chair asked, raising a hand toward the members. Optimism and uncertainty hung like dense fog, creating an unease that weighed heavily in the air. Hands began to rise in support, a glimmer of hope sparking in Mark's heart, but Sarah's hand remained firmly down, unwavering. "I can't vote for someone with limited understanding of our community's needs," she declared, her voice solid. The chair asked. Again, Sarah rose, her hand alone, the silence stretching like a taut string. As the votes were counted, murmurs swept through the room. The chair's voice rang out, and a wave of disbelief crashed over Sarah. Mark stood there, stunned, hope flickering in his eyes. Applause erupted around him, but Sarah felt her heart sink. She had spoken her truth, but they had spoken theirs louder. This community has chosen to embrace change, she thought, battling a knot of uncertainty and emotion. Mark caught her gaze from across the room, sensing her disappointment but also admiration. "I won't let you down," he mouthed silently, his earnestness breaking through the noise that surrounded them. He understood the challenge ahead and committed himself to earning the trust of those who doubted him, especially Sarah. As he shook hands and accepted congratulations, she slipped away, emotions swirling within her. What had she done? Had she fought enough for the community, or had she fought against change too rigidly? Weeks passed after that pivotal meeting. Mark dove headfirst into his role with determination, taking every step needed to ensure transparency and collaboration. He held open forums, listened to concerns, and met with teachers who held reservations. He was beginning to piece together a fabric of unity, even as Sarah watched cautiously from the sidelines. But with each new initiative he rolled out, a spark flickered within Sarah. Maybe the mountains of skepticism were meant to be moved. Maybe her insistence on tradition could meet the luminous hope for innovation. One day she found herself at an informal gathering where Mark spoke passionately about upcoming projects. The energy in the room was different, alive with potential. She felt the shift, and a part of her lightened. maybe he really could make a difference. As the months rolled on, trust began to bloom, rising from the seedlings once battered by doubt. Slowly, Sarah began to find herself aligning with Mark's vision. The once dominating wall that separated their beliefs started to crack and fall away. One night during an event where students showcased their projects, Sarah turned to Mark, pure admiration flooding her heart. "You've done it," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Sarah." "The past has guided my approach," Mark smiled, the eloquence in his voice carrying a note of gratitude. In that exchange, they found a shared commitment to forge a future that incorporated both change and care. What initially felt like a battleground for their community transformed into a symphony of growth. The challenges they faced had taught them more than they had ever imagined. They had uncovered resilience, nurtured connections, and recognized the power of questioning. Sarah learned that sometimes the greatest transformations require skepticism to spark authenticity. Together, they had turned doubt into a stepping stone, creating harmony in a once divided landscape. Crestwood Academy began to flourish as students thrived, parents engaged, and teachers felt supported. And as Mark stood at the helm, he felt grateful not just for the community that had embraced him, but for the unlikely ally who had challenged him to rise. In their journey, they proved one truth: trust is built, moment by moment, through understanding, resilience, and open hearts. And in every challenge, they discovered a chance to grow stronger together. The boardroom was alive with chatter, but when the chairwoman tapped her gavel, silence descended like a blanket. All eyes turned toward Mark, who stood at the front of the room, a slight sheen of sweat glistening on his brow despite the cool air. Today could change everything for him. Crestwood Academy was known for its excellence, but it was also grappling with challenges that needed a steady hand to navigate. There was hope in his heart, but doubt lurked in the shadows. Mark had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, honing his vision of turning the school into a beacon of innovation and student engagement. The job was his dream, yet the look on Sarah's face, a familiar figure on the board, made him feel like a deer caught in headlights. She was known for her fierce dedication to the school and its traditions. He launched into his presentation with enthusiasm, describing programs that could enhance student learning, community involvement, and teacher support. Some board members nodded, their faces lighting up with interest. Mark felt a rush of energy. This was what he was meant to do. But in the back of the room, Sarah remained still, her arms crossed tight against her chest, wariness etched in every line of her face. When Mark finished, the applause was muted. It felt almost polite. Sarah stood up slowly, her expression unyielding. "Mark, thank you for your vision, but can you tell us about your qualifications?" His pulse quickened. "I've led initiatives in my previous schools that increased engagement by over 30%, he replied, trying to sound confident. "Quantifying success in percentages is one thing," Sarah rejoined sharply, "but this community needs someone who understands its history, its heartbeat." There was a murmur in the room as board members glanced at one another, caught in the tension. Mark felt like the walls were closing in on him, every doubt he'd ever faced rising to the surface. He had prepared for scrutiny, but Sarah's piercing gaze felt like a spotlight on his shortcomings. Every meeting that followed became a battlefield. Mark presented his ideas enthusiastically, but it was Sarah's questions that seemed to linger in the air like heavy smoke. She demanded one evening. He struggled to maintain composure as she threw each concern at him like darts, each one striking deeper than the last. "I am dedicated to building a collaborative environment where everyone's voice is heard," he insisted, desperately seeking understanding and support. Behind closed doors, Sarah dug deep into Mark's past. She scoured every detail about his previous positions, contacting colleagues and teachers from schools where he had worked. To Mark, they were just stepping stones toward the future he envisioned, but to Sarah, they were flashpoints. She discovered stories of innovative programs that had missed the mark, failed to engage faculty, or worse, created a rift in the community. Every story she heard raised more questions than it answered. One rainy evening, she met with a small group of concerned parents at a diner just down the street from Crestwood. "He may have glowing statistics, but I've heard firsthand about failed programs," Sarah told them, her voice a mix of concern and determination. As the months went by, tension brewed. Mark felt the pressure mounting and his confidence began to wane. Every week he prepared for the next meeting, diligently listening to feedback and modifying plans, but he couldn't shake Sarah's criticism. It stung. At each board meeting, Mark reiterated his commitment to transparency and collaboration. "I truly believe in engaging all voices in decision-making," he stated, sincerity radiating from him. But Sarah stood before him like a fortress, refusing to yield. "Your commitment sounds good on paper, but what happens when the discussions become messy?" Their clashes intensified, drawing the board deeper into a divide. Some members began to gather in support of Mark. "We need to embrace new ideas," they argued. But Sarah and her allies held firm, warning of the dangers of untested leadership. The cycle kept spinning until the day of the final vote loomed ahead. Mark's stomach twisted in knots as that day approached. He had polished his speech, rehearsed every possible question, and sought advice from mentors. But in the pit of his stomach, dread gnawed at him. On that fateful day, the air thickened with anticipation. Mark stood once again at the front of the room. This time, he could almost feel Sarah's eyes boring into his soul. The sound of the gavel reverberated, signaling the start. Today, the chair said, looking around at the assembled board, we'll decide whether to appoint Mark as our new principal. Hands hesitated before rising tentatively. Mark could only watch, heart pounding like a drum. As the votes unfolded, the momentum swung slowly. Countless discussions and debates coursed through Mark's mind, echoing Sarah's fierce dedication to protecting the school's heart. The chair asked, turning toward a sea of hands that shot up around the room. Mark's throat tightened as he glanced at Sarah, who stood firm, her expression an unwavering bastion of resolve. I cannot vote for someone whose methods lack proven success, she spoke with unwavering conviction. As tension filled the room, Mark felt a lump form in his throat. Moments later, the chair declared, the motion does not pass. Disappointment washed over him like a cold wave. He stood there silent, face flushed, feeling the weight of disbelief and despair. The boardroom erupted into murmurs, some expressing disappointment while others congratulated Sarah for standing firm in her beliefs. Mark stepped away from the front, crushed but determined not to show it. Sarah knew her actions had consequences, and as the applause died down, she fundamentally understood that she had done what she felt was right for the students. Yet beneath her sense of victory lay an unsettling feeling, a nagging doubt. Had she truly acted in the best interests of the school, or had she let her conviction overshadow the opportunity for positive change? Days turned into weeks, and Mark struggled to rebound from the loss. He was left waiting through disappointment, seeking understanding about what had gone wrong. It was challenging not to feel defeated. His dream had slipped through his fingers, yet deep within, a flame of determination flickered. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her journey as a board member, but her journey didn't feel complete. She couldn't abandon the feeling that had rippled through the meeting, a sense of possibility interrupted. The community felt stagnant, and she wondered if her instinct to defend had dimmed the bright prospect that Mark could have brought. One day, Sarah received an email from Mark inviting her to meet for coffee. Part of her wanted to decline, to hide behind her defenses, but curiosity carried her forward. What could he possibly want? The cafe was bustling with life. As she stepped inside, she spotted Mark sitting at a table, a mix of resolve and nervousness carving the lines on his face. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I didn't see any reason to decline," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "I've been thinking a lot about our past meetings and the vote," he started, his voice steady yet tinged with raw emotion. Sarah was taken aback. Here was this man who had faced rejection, reaching out not with bitterness but with a desire to learn. "I appreciate that, but what I realize now is that I didn't engage deeply enough with the community." "You question my credentials because you care," Mark said, his eyes searching for hers. In that moment, a bond began to form, however tentative. "We're all striving for the same goal," Sarah finally admitted. "The students come first." They exchanged stories over steaming cups of coffee, both sharing experiences that had shaped them. Sarah spoke of her fears and hopes for the teachers, her desire for stability. Mark shared how each challenge he faced taught him resilience and the importance of genuine relationships. As the conversation unfolded, a new understanding blossomed. They were united in their passion for education, even if they had initially clashed. Before they parted, Mark offered, "If you're willing, I'd like to invite you to collaborate on a community outreach program." Caught off guard, Sarah hesitated just for a moment. "I think that's a great idea," she finally said, a smile breaking through her formerly rigid demeanor. Over the coming months, their partnership flourished. They worked alongside teachers, parents, and students, developing programs that inspired creativity and growth. Together, they bridged the gap that had once divided them. Gradually, the community began to embrace Mark's ambition with open arms. Many who had once questioned him now praised the transformation unfolding at Crestwood. Sarah found herself standing shoulder to shoulder with Mark, witnessing firsthand the incredible impact of their teamwork. The pressure to protect the school's heart transformed into a desire to enrich its future. In working together, they discovered the balance between tradition and innovation. And so, the story did not end with a defeated vote, rather, it evolved into a dynamic collaboration, revitalizing the community while allowing their strengths to enrich each other. Sarah learned the value of questioning, not as a means of division, but as a tool for discovery. Mark learned that leadership sometimes means leaning on others, especially those who hold different perspectives. With every milestone they reached, each student's success became their shared victory, a testament to their growth both as individuals and as partners. Together, they built not just a school but a community rooted in understanding and collaboration, a legacy that would resonate long into the future. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Mark stood at the front, feeling the weight of every eye on him. This was the moment he had been working toward for months, and yet uncertainty tightened its grip around his heart. Despite his best efforts, one person had become his greatest obstacle: Sarah, the board member known for her fierce dedication to tradition. She had earned her stripes in the school system and wasn't about to let a newcomer disrupt the stability they had fought so hard to maintain. "Let's get started," the chairperson announced, breaking the quiet. Mark began his presentation, his voice steady as he navigated through slides filled with ambitious plans. He painted a picture of a school where innovation thrived, where creative curricula replaced outdated methods, and where students flourished in a hands-on learning environment. As he spoke, some members of the board nodded, eyes shining with excitement. He could feel their enthusiasm boost his confidence, but then he spotted Sarah, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her expression a mix of skepticism and disbelief. When Mark finished, there was a polite round of applause, but as the room quieted again, Sarah stood. "Thank you for your vision, Mark, but before we dive into the merits of your proposals, I have to ask, can you tell us about your previous leadership experience?" Her words cut through the applause and Mark's heart raced. He had anticipated this moment, but her piercing tone knocked him off balance. "Certainly," he replied, summoning every ounce of composure. Sarah wasn't impressed, and what resulted from those initiatives, Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "We faced challenges, yes, but every issue taught us valuable lessons. I've learned that effective leadership requires listening deeply to teachers and parents." "Listening is important," she countered, a steely glint in her eye. "But how can we be sure you will truly understand our community?" Mark could sense the room's breath catch, the weight of Sarah's challenge echoing in the air. He needed to answer, but with every question she raised, he felt himself grappling with uncertainty. "I'm committed to engaging all stakeholders in the decision-making process." He tried to inject sincerity into his words, hoping to sway both her and the other board members, but Sarah wasn't swayed. "Can you guarantee that your vision will not further alienate our community?" Weeks turned into a relentless cycle of meetings, each one feeling like a war of attrition. Mark presented ideas with fervor, but Sarah stood as an immovable wall, unyielding in her challenges. He felt the pressure growing, and each time he stepped into that boardroom, doubt crept closer. What emboldened Sarah was not just the fear of failure, but a deep-seated belief in the school's mission. She had witnessed leadership crumble before, and she refused to let it happen again. Every night she researched Mark's past, unearthing stories from former colleagues, talking to parents in the community, her instinct driving her to protect the very essence of what Crestwood represented. One evening, over coffee with a fellow board member, she expressed her concerns. "We simply cannot afford to take a gamble on someone with a track record that's even slightly questionable." As feelings on the board intensified, the divide became palpable. Some members rallied around Mark, energized by his vision for the future. "It's time to embrace change," they argued. With each passing week, Sarah was increasingly marginalized, yet her resolve never wavered. Then came a pivotal board meeting when Mark unveiled an innovative plan to involve students in local projects, advocating for community partnerships. "This is not just about academics," he proclaimed. Sarah raised an eyebrow, "But what if this fails?" His frustration bubbled to the surface. "That's exactly why I want to collaborate with parents and teachers." Yet Sarah's counter seemed to resonate throughout the room, anchoring the doubts already there. This back and forth went on for months, tension simmering with every meeting. Mark increasingly worried that he would never break through. He thought in despair. As the summer approached, Mark's hope began to dim. It was clear that the board was split. Some desperately wanted the innovation he promised, while others were entrenched in the ideals they had upheld for years. And while Mark prepared himself for the next meeting, sleepless nights haunted him. Could he convince them? Would they still give him the chance he needed? The day of the critical vote arrived, and the atmosphere felt thick with anticipation. As Mark entered the room, the familiar faces looked back at him, each one filled with varying degrees of support or doubt. He took a deep breath and positioned himself at the front. "This is it," he thought, trying to harness every spark of determination he possessed. The discussion began, and as the chair called for opinions, it was difficult to ignore Sarah. She appeared fierce and resolute, prepared to stand her ground. They debated the pros and cons of Mark's vision, each side articulating their beliefs with passion. Then it was time for the vote. There would be no more debating or additions. Mark felt his palms growing clammy as the chair raised her hand. Hands rose slowly around the room, and the group held its breath. Mark's heart raced. The energy surged as he dared to hope, until his eyes fell back on Sarah. She remained still, her hand firmly positioned by her side, a silent sentinel. The chair asked after counting the votes. Sarah's hand shot up, unwavering. In that moment, Mark felt crushed. A defeated spirit blanketed the room, and murmurs swept through the air like charged energy. "The motion does not carry," the chairwoman declared, and Mark stood rooted in shock as disbelief washed over him in waves. As the applause died down, he sensed Sarah's gaze. It was not filled with triumph, but something closer to disappointment. She deeply respected the mission of the school, and her choices were anchored in love for its future. Mark stepped away from the front, heart heavy. Days turned into weeks after the vote. Mark tried to shake off the frustration and disappointment, but it clung to him like an unwanted shadow. The community buzzed around him, but he felt himself withdraw. How could he emerge from this setback? With the weight of rejection on his shoulders, he began to question his future. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her journey as a board member, but the victory didn't feel complete. She could not focus on her work, her heart weary and questioning. Had she made the right choice? The school still felt stagnant and shrouded in uncertainty. One afternoon, she found herself in a coffee shop, her thoughts swirling like the steam rising from her cup. Just then, a shadow crossed her table. It was Mark. He asked, his tone calm despite the storm they had weathered together. Surprised, she nodded. "I wanted to talk," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on the vote, and I think it's important for us to connect." Sarah studied him, struck by the sincerity in his expression. "What's important is that you truly understand this community." "I get that now," Mark admitted. "My ambition was blinding me." In that small cafe, the walls began to fade away. They spoke openly about their hopes and fears, realizing that they both shared the same ultimate goal, providing the best education for students. The conversation evolved, revealing their own vulnerabilities, the pressures of their roles, and the weight of expectations they both faced day in and day out. By the time they parted, a new understanding blossomed between them. Sarah felt lighter, her skepticism softening. She suggested. Mark's eyes lit up with possibility. Over the following months, their partnership flourished, and together they built initiatives that allowed parents, teachers, and students to voice their ideas and concerns freely. The energy around Crestwood began to shift, transforming uncertainty into collaboration. As they cultivated relationships, trust began to grow. Mark worked tirelessly to demonstrate his commitment to the school and its people, listening to the stories that shaped their identities. The community saw him less as an outsider and more as a leader who was willing to learn and adapt. After several months, it was time for the annual community meeting, a platform where they could showcase the programs they'd developed together. As Mark stepped onto the stage, he could see the diverse faces before him. Students, parents, and teachers filled the room, an energy swelling in the air. "Today I stand before you not just as a candidate for leadership, but as a partner in this journey," Mark began. "We are here to transform our school together." As he outlined their new initiatives, Mark didn't just present, he engaged. He made eye contact, invited questions, and showed humility. He brought Sarah to the stage, highlighting her integral role in this partnership. As we move forward, we'll continue to listen to each other and to our students. As the presentation unfolded, Mark watched as faces brightened and a sense of unity began to emerge among them. Questions flowed, but this time there was no tension or skepticism. Instead, it was a dialogue, a conversation grounded in trust. When the meeting concluded, he realized how far they had come. Standing beside Sarah, he felt a bond that transcended their earlier battles. She turned to him, pride glimmering in her eyes. "You did it, Mark. Thanks to you, Sarah. I wouldn't be here without the challenges you put in front of me. They shaped my leadership style," he replied, genuinely grateful. From that day onward, Crestwood Academy transformed with a renewed sense of purpose. Students engaged in community projects that fostered responsibility and collaboration, while parents and teachers came together to support the initiatives they had created. The mission of the school became a shared journey, and the barriers that once separated Mark and Sarah faded into the background. Together, they demonstrated that asking difficult questions is an essential part of growth, and that open dialogue can lead to unexpected partnerships. Through vulnerability and collaboration, they had carved a path forward, uniting a diverse community behind one shared goal: to empower the next generation. In time, Sarah looked back at their journey, realizing the power that lies in questioning and listening closely. Sometimes it takes a bold confrontation to bring about change, but it is through understanding and compassion that true transformations can happen. Mark had not only won the chance to lead, but together they had built a legacy that reflected the richness of their shared endeavors. The room buzzed with anticipation as the board members took their seats. Mark stood at the front, clutching a stack of papers filled with ideas and dreams. His heart raced, not just from excitement, but from the weight of expectations hanging heavy in the air. Today was the day he would present his vision for Crestwood Academy, a place he believed could flourish under his leadership. But then, like a thundercloud looming over a sunny day, Sarah entered the room. Known for her fierce dedication to the school, she held a reputation for asking the hard questions that made many shudder. While others exchanged polite greetings, her unwavering gaze was already fixed on Mark. He had heard stories of her scrutiny, how she protected the school's legacy with the relentlessness of a lioness defending her cubs. Mark took a deep breath, channeling all his energy into the presentation. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my vision," he started, his voice ringing with confidence. He excitedly laid out his plans, highlighting hands-on learning experiences, community partnerships, and thrilling new technology integrations. As he spoke, he could see some board members leaning in, intrigued by the possibilities, but Sarah remained unmoved. She sat at the back, arms crossed, a wall of steel standing strong against the tide of enthusiasm flooding the room. When Mark finished his presentation, he realized he had captured the imagination of many board members. Applause filled the air, but Sarah stood, her posture unyielding. "Thank you for your vision, Mark," she said, her tone firm. "But can you provide examples of your previous accomplishments?" Her question hung in the air like a weighted blanket, silencing the applause. Mark felt his heart sink. He had expected her to challenge him, but the sting hit harder than he anticipated. "Certainly," he replied, fighting to keep his composure. "At my last position, I implemented a program that increased student engagement by over 30%, but Sarah wasn't satisfied." "And when that program met resistance, what did you do?" Mark hesitated, grappling with her intensity. "I learned that true leadership requires listening to everyone involved." "Listening is important," she countered sharply, "but how can we trust that your vision can work here?" Tension crackled in the air as Mark felt himself faltering under her relentless gaze. This wasn't just a discussion, this was a battlefield, and Sarah wasn't going to back down. The weeks that followed turned into a relentless cycle of meetings. Each time Mark presented his ideas, Sarah was there, ready to dissect his every word. She would ask, points sharp like a knife. Mark tried to remain calm, but her criticisms gnawed at him. He reached out to mentors, sought guidance, and worked to refine his approach. He was determined to win over the board, especially Sarah, who seemed to hold the keys to their future. Yet every time he thought he had crafted a convincing proposal, Sarah would challenge him anew. "Your understanding is simply not deep enough," she argued one evening. "We need someone with experience and a personal connection to this community." With every meeting, Mark felt a familiar knot in his stomach. He started to doubt himself, questioning if he would ever gain Sarah's approval. He dedicated sleepless nights to reworking his strategies, gathering data to showcase his ideas, but each week felt like he was treading water. Days turned into weeks, and the tension built like a bowstring ready to snap. Sarah seemed to find joy in questioning Mark, her fierce resolve only growing stronger with each interaction. Behind the scenes, she spoke with parents and teachers, gathering opinions and feedback. She was determined to stand her ground, believing she was protecting the school from what she perceived as unchecked ambition. Finally, the day of a pivotal board meeting arrived. Mark prepared like a soldier ready for battle. The sun was shining, but the weight of uncertainty sat on his shoulders. "This has to be the moment," he thought. He walked into the room, rehearsing his speech in his mind. The atmosphere felt charged, thick with anxious energy. As he launched into his presentation, he saw some members nodding along, captivated, but his eyes strayed to Sarah. She stared back, a sentinel at the gate, ready to unleash her pointed questions. He outlined a collaborative plan, detailing how he envisioned teachers participating in the process as equals. "Together we can foster an environment of creativity and innovation," he declared passionately. But Sarah raised a hand, her face unwavering. "Mark, that sounds wonderful in theory, but what happens when realities clash with your plans?" Mark took a breath, steeling himself. "That's why I want to establish a transition committee. I want to involve teachers and parents in every step." The room felt electric. Mark's words had struck a nerve, but Sarah pushed harder. "You're proposing a committee as a band-aid solution." He felt the frustration rising within him. "Yes, that's precisely what I'm saying." With tensions escalating, the meeting ended without a resolution. Mark felt deflated as he walked out. The cycle of doubt and questioning took its toll, leaving him drained. He began to wonder if he would ever break through the wall Sarah had built around her beliefs. Days turned into countless sleepless nights. He could feel the pressure mounting, threatening to consume his very purpose. As he lay awake, contemplating his future, he realized he was no longer just fighting for his vision. He was fighting for the future of Crestwood itself. But in his heart, he knew he could bring something valuable to the table. His thoughts drifted between determination and despair. Would he ever be able to change Sarah's mind? Did he have what it took to lead? Then, just as the sun broke over the horizon one morning, a breakthrough came. Mark received a call from a former colleague who had worked alongside him at his last school. "They're resistant to change, Mark," she said, "but you managed to turn tides before." Her encouragement ignited a flicker of hope within him. Armed with renewed determination, he spent the next few days crafting a new proposal, focusing on community engagement and the importance of building relationships. He began each day early, mapping out a strategy to foster collaboration among teachers, parents, and students alike. As he prepared for the next board meeting, he felt a sense of purpose strengthening within him. It was time to show them the power of genuine connection. As Mark walked into the room, he felt a deep breath stabilize his nerves. "Thank you all for being here," he began with clarity. "Today I want to talk not just about numbers, but about the incredible potential we can unlock together." He looked straight at Sarah, holding her gaze as he spoke. "Imagine a community where every voice is heard, where teachers feel empowered to innovate, and parents feel connected to their children's education." As he laid out his ideas, Mark made it a point to connect emotionally with the board. Shared stories of students who thrived under similar programs, real examples that showcased not just numbers but lives transformed. The board began to lean in, captivated by his sincerity. "You have the power to shape this future alongside me," he said, and in a moment of vulnerability, he added, "I know I have missed the mark before, and I apologize for not understanding the deep roots this community holds." There was a shift in the room, an almost imperceptible softening of hearts. Sarah, arms still crossed, took a breath, her tension easing slightly as she considered his words. When the meeting ended and the board moved to vote, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Mark could hardly sit still. The chair asked, lifting her hand. As hands slowly began to rise, Mark's heart raced. He wasn't naive. He knew Sarah's hand would remain down, but the support from other members awakened hope. The chair asked, glancing towards Sarah. Mark held his breath. She hesitated, her fingers seemingly poised at the precipice of change. But slowly she raised her hand. It felt like a gut punch, but the votes had been counted. The motion passes. Shockwaves rippled through the room. Applause erupted as Mark stood there, stunned, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He glanced at Sarah, her expression a mix of respect and resolve, and for the first time he saw that there was no animosity in her gaze, just a deep understanding of what lay ahead. Later, as he shook hands and received congratulations, Mark caught Sarah's eye. "Thank you for pushing me, Sarah." She nodded, a small smile creeping onto her face. "You surprised me today, Mark." In that moment, both realized what true leadership meant, the willingness to question, adapt, and learn. It was a partnership that would shape the future of Crestwood Academy. They had crossed a bridge from skepticism to collaboration, and there at the end lay the promise of something beautiful. Some storms are necessary, they learned, not to destroy, but to nourish new growth. As Mark stepped into his role, he felt the weight of responsibility, understanding that he wouldn't just be leading a school, he would be part of a community striving for greatness. With every challenge they faced together, he and Sarah would unlock not just the secrets of effective leadership, but the power of unity and vision woven together to create a brighter future. The boardroom fell silent as the chairwoman's gavel struck the table. The anticipation in the air crackled like electricity. Mark stood at the front, his heart pounding in his chest. He was ready to unfold his vision for Crestwood Academy, but he couldn't shake the unease creeping over him. All eyes were on him, but one pair Sarah's felt especially piercing. She was known for her fierce defense of the school's legacy, and today he would have to face her head-on. "Thank you all for being here," Mark began, his voice steady but not without a hint of nervousness. A few board members nodded, their curiosity piqued. As he showcased his grand plans for the school hands-on learning, community partnerships, tech integration, Mark watched the faces in the room shift from skepticism to intrigue. Hope bubbled within him. This was it, but as he glanced at Sarah, who remained immovable, his stomach churned. He could sense her walls growing higher as he spoke. When he wrapped up his presentation, a polite, albeit hesitant applause filled the room. Sarah stood up slowly and the room turned to her, a shadow creeping over the enthusiasm. "Mark, thank you for your presentation," she said, her tone sharp and unwavering. "Can you tell us more about your qualifications?" A wave of uncertainty washed over him. He had anticipated questions, but the pointedness of her inquiry cut deeper than he expected. "I've led initiatives in my previous schools that increased student engagement by over 30%, he replied, trying to inject confidence into his voice. Narrowing her eyes slightly, Sarah pressed on. "Those numbers are impressive, but what did you learn from your mistakes?" Heat rose to Mark's face. He could feel every other board member holding their breath, captivated by the tension between him and Sarah. "I learned that leadership requires listening to everyone involved," he stammered, trying to find his footing. "Listening is only part of the equation, Mark," Sarah countered, her voice cutting through like a knife. "We need someone who truly understands the heart of this community." The room shifted, a palpable tension hanging in the air. Mark leaned forward, feeling the pressure mounting. "I'm committed to engaging with this community. I've researched the culture here and want to collaborate, not just impose new ideas," he insisted, his voice rising in urgency, but Sarah remained unfazed. Each question Sarah posed felt like a punch to the gut, challenging every ounce of confidence he had. This was not just a debate, it was a battle for his professional future. As he looked around, he could see red flags popping up among the board members, their expressions divided. Some appeared intrigued, but others leaned towards apprehension, caught in the storm of skepticism Sarah had stirred. Days turned into weeks as the board held multiple meetings. Mark kept presenting his ideas, attempting to address each of Sarah's concerns, but she was relentless. At every turn, she found a new way to challenge him. "You need to build trust here," she would say, voice unwavering. As Mark spun his wheels trying to make progress, he wrestled with the growing fear that Sarah might actually be right. Perhaps he didn't fully grasp the depth of connection this community had. Perhaps he wasn't the best fit after all. Sleepless nights played tricks on his mind, and doubt seeped into his thoughts like an unwelcome guest. In one tense meeting, after Mark detailed yet another innovative program, Sarah stood firm. "We've heard a lot of ideas, Mark," she said, crossing her arms, "but I still don't see how you'll implement them without a strong connection to our values." Mark felt his resolve faltering. I believe change isn't about losing what's valuable, it's about enhancing it, he asserted, knowing he needed to convince her. It's crucial to respect the history and strength of the school while navigating a path forward. As the weeks rolled on, Mark felt as though he were walking on a tightrope, balancing between the optimistic future he envisioned and the harsh realities Sarah presented. Anxiety mounted like clouds before a storm. He would replay their conversations in his head, searching for a way to break through her defenses. He had to find a way to resonate with her and with the rest of the board. Then one fateful evening, he received a call from an old mentor, a former principal who had witnessed Mark's journey. "You're fighting an uphill battle, I know," she said, "but don't forget sometimes the strongest leaders are those who listen first and act later. You've developed excellent ideas, but how do they fit in the context of their community?" Inspired by her words, Mark returned to the drawing board. He listened to his mentor's advice and began to reach out within the community, phone calls to parents, coffee meetings with teachers, and chats with students. He wanted to hear their stories and understand their fears. Each conversation revealed the rich history of Crestwood, the values woven into the fabric of the school. As the next board meeting approached, Mark felt a transformation taking place within him. He was no longer just a candidate presenting ideas. He was now a part of a larger story, the community's story. On the day of the meeting, a newfound resolve surged through him. He walked into the boardroom prepared not just with his vision, but with the voices of those he had listened to. When he began his presentation, he felt different, empowered, and connected. "I've taken the time to truly understand the voices within this community," he said, standing taller. "I want us to embark on this journey together." As he spoke, Mark shared the insights he had gathered from parents and teachers. He highlighted their hopes, concerns, and dreams for their children's futures. The room felt charged with emotion. For the first time, he could see Sarah's expression shifting, an eyebrow raising slightly in surprise. "From my conversations, it's clear that our strength lies in our unity," he continued, gesturing to the board. "Together, we can bridge the gap between tradition and innovation." Sarah didn't interrupt this time. Mark felt a swell of confidence as he noticed her listening intently, the walls around her beginning to crack. He was sharing not just his vision, but a vision that belonged to them all. When he wrapped up, applause erupted in the room, warm and genuine. But as Sarah stood, Mark felt an adrenaline rush surge through him, a mixture of anticipation and fear. "Thank you, Mark," she said, her tone softer but true to her nature. "You've certainly taken a different approach today." As he felt the thrill of the moment, the chair motioned for the vote. Hands began to rise slowly, including a few that surprised him. Hope flickered within his chest, but when he searched for Sarah's hand, he noticed her pause, uncertainty clouding her features. The chair asked. Mark held his breath, willing her to consider. In a game of 10 seconds, Sarah's hand rose hesitantly, and with it, a palpable silence filled the room. "I still fear this community may not be ready for the changes proposed," she articulated, her voice resolute. Mark's heart sank. He implored, desperation leaking through. A wave of disbelief washed over him, drowning the hope he had only just begun to cultivate. The room erupted in murmurs, some expressing concern while others congratulated Sarah for her steadfastness. Mark felt frozen, disbelief paralyzing his thoughts. It seemed as if he had climbed a mountain only to find the peak crumbling beneath his feet. As the meeting concluded, Mark stepped back, heart heavy, wrestling with the rejection. Sarah watched him, her expression softer, evidencing the conflict swirling within her. "You still have a journey ahead, Mark," she said quietly, not unkindly. Days turned into weeks, and Mark found himself grappling with disappointment. He sought solace in the familiar trails behind the school, the sunset reflecting his turmoil. Every step felt like a questioning of his purpose. Yet deep within, a flicker remained. He didn't want to give up. Meanwhile, Sarah wrestled with her choice. Weighing her commitment to the school against her instinctive desire to protect its history kept her awake at night. As she saw the students each day, growing and striving, she couldn't shake the thought that perhaps Mark was part of the change they needed. Then one evening, a pivotal moment happened. Sarah received an email from Mark requesting a meeting. Intrigued and uncertain, she agreed. They met in the same cafe where they had crossed paths before, the air charged with tension yet laced with a hint of hope. "Thank you for meeting me," Mark began, his vulnerability on display. "I've spent time reflecting, and I believe we could find common ground." "I appreciate that, Mark," Sarah replied, carefully keeping her guard up. "But trust isn't built in a day." Mark nodded. "I'm committed to listening, not just to talk. Let's create a plan together, one that respects our traditions while embracing the future." As their conversation unfolded, the tension softened. They shared their thoughts, their hopes, and slowly but surely, the barriers began to crumble. Sarah felt a spark of possibility ignite as she listened to Mark talk about collaboration and community. "I want this school to be a place where students can thrive, and not just academically," Mark emphasized. "I want them to feel supported and connected." Together, they were slowly weaving that thread of partnership. But just as the air shifted from burdensome despair to hope, Mark received a phone call that sent him spiraling. It was from a prominent member of the community, someone he greatly respected. "We need to talk, Mark," the voice said urgently. "Things are brewing in the community and they don't look good. People are losing faith." The weight of her words hit him hard. Mark had already faced rejection from the board, but now there were whispers spreading through the community. He looked over at Sarah, who had just begun to soften. Had he lost the chance to prove himself before he had even begun? He asked, urgency lacing his voice. As he hung up, anxiety gripped him. He couldn't afford to lose the ground he had just gained. But what could he do to rally support when faced with an undercurrent of doubt? The echo of uncertainty beat in his chest as he prepared a response, leaving behind the frail thread of hope he had just begun to weave with Sarah. Would their partnership collapse before it had the chance to flourish? Would all his efforts be in vain? The night felt endless as Mark replayed every conversation, every moment of connection he had experienced. And as dawn broke, a sense of urgency fueled him. Today felt pivotal, a hinge point for Crestwood Academy, a struggle to survive or a leap toward transformation. Tomorrow's meeting would determine everything. Would he find the courage to face potential backlash or retreat into the shadows of defeat? With the first light of dawn, he prepared himself, determined to rise to the occasion. Would this be the turning point or the end of the road? In that instant, the weight of his future bore down, teetering on the precipice of possibility and peril.